their videos, you see something sign that happens once or twice or more than that, you should take note, and that's speaking to identifying factors within the market and consumer behavior and symbolism and terminology and whatnot. The variables, the objective identifying factors that are found within each phase of the alchemical classic cycle. I've already spoken about, how in some instances there's been a lot of trying testing and product category range and eventually get to the eye of the classic cycle and individualism, and I can do, I'd rather just do it yourself sort of thing, which might overlap with phase 3 and 4, craftsmanship, soul systems go, and trying to reevaluate and analyze how a certain set of factors or component parts of a product or methodology might work better and reconfigured, or so and so how you might get through a bunch of accordance phases, trying a bunch of different products of, say, toothbrushes or something, a bunch of toothbrushes, and you're just like, I can do this better. Basically, it's consumer mentality, behavior, just like wanting it to be to your liking and preferences and whatnot, having probably not something satisfactory up to that point, and hoping to reintroduce something to the market that's better in quality or performance. So we can, a combination of just talking about how to earlier, just how to go about out of necessity, just sort of invention or innovation. Because even in an ideal world, you can always scale back and, ideally, I was talking about being hypothetically pregnant, how I would probably come up with a bunch of different target design and clothing and ideas or innovations to some degree, on some scale, just out of necessity. I wish I didn't have to do this. I wish this was like this, or, fabric like this would help, out of necessity or out of preference. But either way, that is what innovation is. It's just improvement upon what we already have, and sometimes the reinvention of it. But yeah, so those identifying factors within the phase, there are visual cues, visuals, and terminology and whatnot that both are standard and over the years extrapolated upon and built upon, and some just out of sayings and things that came about on their own that related at the time to that phase or what it was we were talking about in relation to a phase or in relation to a specific type of mentality of either needing to herd together and tribe together and reestablish some sort of tradition or sense of community, and then from there, obviously, so the pendulum in a sense in a shorter time scale, and the opposite of wanting to reestablish one's independence and trying to find a balance therein with having, a good work and home life balance, as we might say. It's just, typical phrase you hear, but if you were to hear that over and over, that being something that was repeatedly talked about in initiatives or in group meetups that you happen to notice flyers for it, and just kind of taking note of the things around you. It's just kind of being a sponge or being a forecaster of noticing where consumer mindset is at or where people are, because that it's pretty easy to identify through what I've been saying, these identifying factors or like trends, and whether that be very simplistic trends that you see of the moment, very much of a decade even, where all kids are wearing this, or doing this with their hair, you know, to larger, more broader scale shifts in culture and society, of introduction of a technology or whatnot, and all of a sudden, like the pandemic would have been an example also of shifting alternate realities. All of a sudden, everyone's realities are quite different, and it's exemplified through all these new consumer behavior patterns of having to buy things online and delivery service, and that would help someone identify, where should I, if I'm going to start my own business, maybe, you know, something of some sort of delivery service back then, you know, but crossed with like the phase 3 of All Systems Go, and these shorter terms, I compared it to the 3rd house of Virgo versus the 9th house of Pisces, of small talk versus depth conversations on a deeper level about spirituality, of things in the 9th house, or shorter distance travel versus far distance travel overseas, day trip versus spending like a year abroad or something. But not necessarily, since it's not an exact classic cycle, doesn't go through 12 houses. Although there are alchemical cycles, I just went with one that I felt had the most basic universal codes and was in ratio accordance with what I'd already decided to go with as characteristics from my theory of everything, DNA-based pairs, octave skills, cute speech, constellations and whatnot, that I could just, because there was also ones that were like 18, 17, I think 14 and 24 phases, so I just felt like it was concept demonstrating for itself, keep it classic, simple, timeless, and just simple, and distilled down as much as possible to 7/8 phases, like, you know, the repeating note of a scale. That, yeah, I mean, I think it's a good combination to be able to shoot as far as the moon. In an ideal world, I would have some sort of recycling service that made it so I didn't have to clean the recycling dishes, and, you know, and it would just separate them out and do it for me and that kind of thing. And like my recycling machine, if honestly though, it can determine that something can't be recycled because it still has food on it and you didn't wash it, and why can't it just separate it and put it into a to be washed and then recycled category? Like, if it can determine, like, can't just take the next step, you know? It probably, I don't know about the recycling, you know, it's like process. But I do know about consumer behaviors. I did study consumer sciences and business marketing and whatnot, and why, you know, also incorporated the translation of data, my data, and trend tracking of 2 years, and how far those basic concepts reached and were widespread within both the fashion industry and then beyond that, and all these different ways, and demonstrated visually in social media and runway sets and campaigns and music videos and all kinds of things like that, fashion show sets and collections and design elements and all of it. And then within that terminology, and how far-reaching that got in different industries as well, and to hear a repeating term, or but also let you know that people were not only on board but like accepting of that sort of, resonate with that in the sense that verb usage, even, but the way of describing things kind of gives you, even on the smallest scale, like an idea of what people are grasping onto and what are people gravitating towards in the market, within their own lives, and that's just basically forecasting and seeing that and knowing where people are going to go and what they're going to need least being able to identify current needs and also within your own life of just what it is that I'm drawn towards and seeing a lot of needing, tired of, wishing I had in my life. All those kind of things that kind of guide my design process or concepts, ideas, or wish list. Which is not what my playlists are, but they're usually some sort of subtle demonstration of the classic cycle. I invite people to participate in that sense of incorporating, or at least further highlighting, identifying those visual codes from the alchemical classic cycle and their music video sets or clothing choices or color choices or whatnot. And since we're already sort of on that cycle, it kind of helps you to identify that, and you can break away from it, or you can guide it, or you can go along with the flow. Just always be on trend. But either way, that helped me then to be able to connect playlists in a multi-dimensional sense as well, and complexity and all of this, the entanglement of time lines and whatnot, almost making it seem like you can go back in time. People were able to, in a sense, and incorporate personal meanings that only developed out of organic sort of cause and effect of, or train of thought, or whatever it is, natural occurrences, that then take on new significance when I look back at those videos, and I'm just like, it's almost as if they were able to, that didn't mean anything to me then, but it's so personal now that it's almost as if they were able to go back in time and incorporate that, knowing that would be a perpetual discovery of significance or meaning of multi-layered visuals and messages and media. But I compared it to art and commerce and that company. It's a roster of photographers and videographers and creative directors and designers and stylists and whatnot that they work with to produce campaigns that are pretty artistic in nature and serve any purpose as far as commercial advertising goes. And I mean, fashion is an industry that is a multi-billion-dollar industry. If I can prove that my ideas and concepts would not only last and take on some sort of timeless quality of classic, shooting for iconic here, right? Or at least a repeating of wonders. Concepts that just take off or just establish a house or brand, puts a new direction, gains momentum, and even if it's just an idea or a concept that translates really well into a campaign that exemplifies the season, or it just becomes one of those iconic campaigns that everyone references, later on, and it takes a special ability to pinpoint where people's mindsets are at and just kind of good feel for it intuitively, but then having some sort of cycle or system, concept demonstrating for itself, system that allows you to both confirm yourself, like fashion forecasters or any forecasters will often make confirmation reports of their predictions and whatnot, establishing credibility and to get clientele, customers, to get subscriptions and whatnot to their forecasting services, like WGSN or Donecker. I don't really know so much about economic forecast. It seems pretty one-dimensional, as it's only one factor of what is taken into account in fashion forecasting, which is pretty much every industry, and past, present, and referential or hypothetical future, and all types of demographics, from couture to product design to children's wear to sportswear to home design and all types of consumer behavior, which is, yeah, again, I studied Baylor Consumer Sciences. It's the overall Bachelor of Arts. Family and Consumer Sciences. Which I like to stick with a specialized degree in fashion design and minor in business administration. We used to call it that building, the FCS building, Family Consumer Sciences building, the MRS degree, general studies. If you weren't specializing in design or fashion merchandising, that's pretty much what came out. The communications major where I literally had to take a class. It was family planning, you know, how to make budgets and grocery lists and all kinds of things. And at the time, like, yeah, that would be helpful if that was my, I guess, immediate goal, next goal, you know. But at the time, I was like a freshman in college, and like daydreaming of graduating and moving to New York and fulfilling my design dreams. It's funny, I kind of came full circle because my very first project in my design course, my first design course at Baylor, made a big designer, and at the time, Zach Posen just won the CFDA, and it was just really big at the time. You know, it was just like a mood board and report on recent collection and some things like that. To finishing at Baylor and getting my internship at Zach Posen. And like things I feel like are meant to be, they just sort of flow. And from that, I was the illustration and design intern there, and worked with the design team, just illustrating some of their looks as pretty big collections, and then sort of special gowns. Swarovski enlisted like a few designers to design custom gowns with Swarovski crystals for Christmas windows of Saks Fifth Avenue. And so Zach Posen was asked, and he then, after designing it, which I did the illustration for, this big Christmas tree dress, he sent it over to one of his out-of-house dressmakers who stole a lot of his finale gowns, and so yeah, these really big gowns and a lot of evening or red carpet gowns, and this dress was going to be like tons of green tulle and looked like a tree, basically. So it had a room all to itself, and I went and I went and worked with Camilla, who was one of his source places. They sent us to sample makers, and worked with her for like a week and just constructed the dress, and then she left me alone for a while and just had to sew on those crystals, those ornaments to it, those Swarovski crystals, all over the dress for a week. And then her neighbors were ruffian in that building. She was a design duo, and they came over to her studio one afternoon when I was working there and complaining about the rent or something like that, or the economy, because it was like 2008. And she introduced me to them and showed them my illustration for Zach Posen, and they called me up the next day and asked if I would bring in my portfolio of illustrations, be their collection illustrator, and that I started working technical design at intern at Alexander Wang, and a bunch of internships, production, Gabrielle Azrael and assistant designer, coach, and dirty handbags division. A lot of freelance, a lot of temp jobs. His coach is really great. Company I work for is building off of like 9th Avenue. It's kind of like on the water. It's a long walk from the subway. I remember that being like, it's running. It's too late. But it was just this big building. It's all coach and just really nicely like run and clean and organized, and everyone had their little teams within the divisions. Coach is a pretty big company, so everything from one way, you know, to leather goods to their accessory lines, clothing, all that. So there's tons of different teams, and I worked with really nice. We always went out to lunch, and he had like a big office, and he was just an assistant designer making like mood boards, some flats, CADs, color CADs. Around a lot and then put myself back through school at FIT since I didn't get draping and some other specific technical design training at Baylor. So I had already been through school, so I was able to do a 2-year in one. Just everything I need to know, which means I never slept, but it was really fun. And, you know, design schools, typically, unless you're going to like use tons of money to just start your own line right out of school, it's pretty much the only time you're going to like have to be your own sort of creative director. Most likely you're going to end up working as a technical designer for some, you know, some company and making flats like 9 to 5, or even in the smaller, more design atelier, you just probably still be working under someone else's vision. So design school is usually the only time I felt like there was to just really explore your own sort of strengths and weaknesses and what you want to like develop further, and just do whatever it is you want, and basically within parameters, of course. I think the theme for this year, advanced draping, that's don't know why, but so there's always been links to like Andy Warhol, and actually my senior advanced draping professor worked in couture houses. She met Andy Warhol at like Studio 54, 70s or so. He asked her to make like t-shirts for him. I rented from someone who knew him in the 80s. She was around him when he was starting Movie Magazine, doing all these stories about him. She was actually married to this guy who was in music, and he's from Jamaica, and tell me how you play soccer with Bob Marley growing up. His music would go on like tour with Snoop Dogg and do his music and electricians. He made guitar pedals, handmade wooden guitar pedals for Yeah-Yeahs and Beastie Boys. It was just always interesting to have conversations with people that were slightly older, who'd been in New York in like the 70s or 80s. 90s, and stories about what it was like then, and how that woman, she was going through a divorce at the time, and Andy and a bunch of people went out to dinner in Movie Magazine, and she was just having a really difficult time with that, and it was really quiet, and Andy just like held her hand under the table and like offered her this limo to take back. pretty sweet. I was like, how do you think you like me? She's like, of course, he was, loved anyone from the Midwest. We were just talking there, like, in the studio, all kinds of stories, and she had all these cool clothes from the 70s and 80s, and funny enough, everything was Rosalie. Just, you know, there's always red rose. It's just in both in videos I'd find and things that sort of naturally keep out and whatnot. You know, I chose videos for certain reasons having to do with a very specific set of things. You could probably go back and watch that 2-hour video where I talk about all this in depth and invite people to participate in those kind of set parameters I felt were identified and sort of translated into modern terms like pop-ups and third phase, short term, just like special editions and series of product categories and products offerings and whatnot, temporary things that kind of introduce things in that sense. Experiments, he had fun, any weight, pun intended, weight and gold. So that was that. The only option I really had to translate it to monetary sense, data to gold, which that speaks to the chemical cycle as well. Metal into gold, or so it was all very conceptual in a sense, and it worked out great. The math was questionable. It's hopefully not. But it, yeah, overall, it's artistic initiative and kind of guided me, and I also felt strongly about that particular cycle as the projects that had led up to that endeavor were pretty more or less in line with the phases themselves. So I sort of had faith that one idea would be successful, that would lead to another, you know, in those categories or phases, like hybrids and these types of creatures that were identified in birds of a feather, and chameleons, karma, and midpoints, the sun and moon, and that is within the alchemical cycle, the sun and moon, the king and queen, and the right and left hemispheres of the mind, and balance, and all these things, the axes of the heaven, to the masculine, feminine, all these types of ways of thinking about it in metaphysics sense. But yeah, and all these different projects that all sort of spoke to these various repeating themes that I felt strongly about choosing that particular alchemical cycle and accordingly to represent, you know, to compare these metatrends to, and different architectural elements of the universe, like DNA-based pairs and violin strings and constellations and cute speech and the alphabet, which I translated from English into the runic alphabet, managed to do 24 letters versus 26. So each dot within those data plays represents a multitude of factors. It represents a DNA base pair that's being compared to a day in the year within a certain time, constellation, period, in a month, a violin string, a note, scale, keyed speech, hand shape and gesture, a meta trend, different ways to compare it. That's why the platform was made, comparing a multitude of large variances of data. So within meta trends, you can pull up all the ideas that worked well and how far they went and how, you know, That's why those graphs changed, because it offered a lot of different smaller graphs below that you could see in those videos of backstage pass. I made just an idea of how that went together, but click between, compare different factors in a larger category, and the graphs would change, and from that, this data, that plotted data, different colors and different patterns, that I believe, if really get into like the study of synesthesia and neurology and pattern recognition with different brain categories, just engagement of one color, shape, and location on a screen, pattern recognition to ignite a part of the mind and get that engaged with another part, and that being visual versus the auditory one concept, and the auditory device of more acoustic training and adjustment for a period of time, just the brain to elevate to a higher resonance, I think, or just function at a higher level that's completely organic and natural, basically, as just be a mold. Like an opera house or a symphony hall is architecturally designed to be acoustically sound and resonate the best, highest vibrations. And so incoming sound from one ear to the other is slightly different, at least subtly perceived and subconsciously perceived, and it's the brain making that distinction, which is speaking to perceptual learning and making a distinction in order to attune to best, like tuning your playing and finger position on, or bow speed, or string even, if you're playing the wrong string, to the rest of the orchestra, be able to perceive that difference in tone or pitch, and while engaging muscle memory, movement, reading the music notes, and listening, hearing, and just slightly moving your fingers all at once, and to instant, make quick decisions, quick adjustments. And that speaks to the tarot, and how the 8 and 11 are switched in top, and strength and justice and celeste and adjustment. And that being also my birthday, 11/26, 11/8. So mine is just perceiving a slight difference. So knowing that and being able to attune yourself, and I think that's just, in some sense, evolution is, and just the improvement over time. That then grew up to the epigenetics research that was going on at Einstein College of Medicine. That was that group that I was, that initiative I was getting involved in, and met with that artist that had already been, was reading up in the New York Times article about perceptual learning. Starting to offer a different creative perspective. We talked for like 3 hours about just concepts of this idea or that idea. And yeah, I was going to be learning a lot about DNA, and just got into that hybrid artist residency coding school for poetic computation, no less. So with my value of ideas, alchemical cycle proposal, basically, and unfortunately it's $5,000 plus, I wouldn't be able to work like full-time school and my own artist residency, making some sort of project over the course of, would have been a lot more technically, like visually, aesthetically modern looking versus what I made with my little video shop editor, and just piecing together clips of the graphs that moved in like 2 cycles, and then some sort of choreography over them. Basically a beat from the 4 walls, and a beat is a different way of reading music. 4 beats to the bar of music. Visual metronome, just without the in-depth knowledge of music composition and composing and sound engineering and coding. In that sense, I couldn't pick the colors. That's why, the platform that was made for Picasso.io was made for that initiative at the Einstein College of Medicine specifically, but it was open to the public. And I just think a lot of graphs. I thought they were just so beautiful and interesting. I love comparing like maps and graphs and data and just entertain myself. Going to the subway, maps, just locations, spatial relations to things. SimCity, urban area, or city layout. But yeah, so unfortunately that's when I moved back here. I was pretty much at my 7th house already in Science Aquarius, Jupiter and Aquarius area in life, but it's been like a doubling down on that, I guess. The last 8 years, 9 years, 10 years. I did an open invitation to attend that residency if I ever were back in New York. I pretty much feel like I've just been done, and there's different levels of thinking about it as well, and ways of demonstrating just the complexity. And various points as well. Vision. And that speaking to hypothetically, like wormholes and through a wardrobe and some sort of interstellar tesseract, or just how I design a wardrobe, this wardrobe. One thing just leads to another, and like I was saying, those projects, Birds of a Feather and kind of Chameleons, and Sony, that led to the Lens series and interest and what to do next and take it to the next level, and then one thing always leads to the next thing, and just I think it says a lot about people's psychology as well, and just consumer behavior patterns, very perceptive artistic development, being able to notice what motivates you, impresses, pushes you forward, pushes me forward as far as, well, I've done that, what am I going to take from that, and what am I going to do next, what interests me now, and my focus, what pushes people forward, basically, what pushes society forward as the pulse cycle speaks on all those levels, from physiological and personal and psychological to environmental and societal and economic. So what takeaways from that? I felt like it could be extrapolated upon what he's saying. Felt like it was confirmation of the direction I should go in finding it itself. and yeah, oh wow, this really aligns with projects that I've done up to this point, or these interest systems, developing system, and data. So I then renamed that classic. The point is to kind of distill down and get to the essence of an idea or of compound or material in alchemy. The essentials and distillation to that point, keeping things as timeless and as based on some sort of concrete fundamentals that have been tried and tested and proven to carry consumers forward, or carry so all kinds of that progress a brand forward, that move one, sometimes even act as stepping stones, but that's also again what I was tracking and charting, and how far an idea went, kind of dropped off, and popular culture, even like certain media, certain terminology, even how fast some people pick up on that as well. How quickly a trend that would be something visually specific within more or less mostly seeing like what maybe certain fashion brands aesthetic, then pick up pace and filter into other areas of the industry and other categories and other, you know, ways of thinking about that. If it's conceptually or some sort of commercial initiative or way or visual, just incorporating into marketing campaign or something of that nature. Lyric, I mean, it's almost when you can identify these things, they become almost experimental to see if that is in fact something that would be largely accepted by the greater public, or you could, you know, be the antithesis then. You're more of an avant-garde designer, or looking to innovate in some sense that is completely unexpected. I mean, it just gives some freedom in that sense to just either go with the flow or just your natural process, or is more of a just logical, logistical sort of methodology. I always feel like it's always to have a good balance, because otherwise, you know, you have to know why and for what reasons those ideal goals or ideal products would be good and would actually translate into some sort of commercial sense or make a lot of money, or and apart from your own personal, as to some sort of broader utility, of course, sort of with, and then that got to like customizing and individual phase and how a product evolves over time, or if you introduce a new specialized product category just to meet a consumer goal, and you know, sort of need that to be identified, being able to identify that, I think, and we're the first to do that. You know, having some sort of statement piece, even within a good collection, keeps it fresh in people's minds, keep some sort of reference point or some sort of thing that stands out, otherwise it kind of comes together. There's a lot of psychology involved in all of this as well, so that's why Psyche's Odyssey is taking some sort of another level, taking some sort of my own astrology chart, questioning whether or not that does, and delving into astrology and the details of it, and overlaps in the tarot, just uncanny, discovered around the same time if that held any weight or not, and if what ways I related to it based on the house system, and finding other ways I could perhaps utilize the astrology house system to there's all kinds of get excited about systems, but that we also, again, all systems go the A of the classic cycle, and just achieving chemical goals or achieving some sort of, well, as boring as it sounds, something like B code is a classic that will forever be a staple that, you know, if you were the person to have come up with it, you know, back in the day, patent something like that, you know, which I'm kind of talking about here, but basically, yeah, I mean, that would have been a chemical classic goal, because that's stuck around, and that's something that can be revamped and updated, or in all types of contexts and seasonally as well, and just that style. So, and I guess I achieved the alchemical philosopher's stone. So I was listening to something on alchemy at the same time that I noticed a dragonfly on my porch, and it's never seen before. One green dragonfly, emerald green. So he said, achieving the philosopher's stone is represented by a dragonfly, also crucified. Straightforward.